Hey there, macro folks. This is Mr. Hooker, and we are on video number 3 for the big picture. So let's get to it. So, looking more at long run economic growth. So, I was giving you some of the things that I had experienced growing up in the end of the last video. Here is a bar graph looking at 1960 versus 2019. Washing machines, air conditioning, cell phones, and computers. In 1960, 41% of houses had a washing machine. Today, 82%. In 1960, 12% had air conditioning. Today, it's 87%. Nobody had cell phones. They weren't around yet. 96% of homes have a cell phone now, and nobody had computers. They weren't around yet, and 92% have one now. It's kind of interesting in the way that actually works out. Uh, So long-run economic growth is a modern invention, if you want to look at it that way. Britain, for example, wasn't any richer in 1650 than it was 2 centuries earlier. Countries don't necessarily grow at the same rate, and there's a catch-up thing to that. Like so, poor countries grow at a fast rate, richer countries grow at a slower rate, and so the poorer countries can catch up. And so I mentioned to y'all the whole thing about Haslam, I mean not Haslam, uh, Hans Rosling's 200 countries over 200 years in 4 minutes. That video will show you the catch up if you want to see it. Um, but Britain was once substantially richer than the U.S., but it was overtaken by the U.S. after 1875. So it's a whole thing about that. Um, so one of those things, 1650, um, is roughly 100 years before the first industrial revolution. So once you get to the mid 1700s, you have the first industrial revolution, which caused Adam Smith to write the Inquiry into the Wealth of Nations in 1776 because people's lives measurably improved. And then you have the second industrial revolution in the mid 1800s, which was which was the improvements in the steam engine and all of those associated technologies with rail and things like that. And that actually is where uh, you get the bend in human development and human prosperity, which is a video that I have in here for you called The Hockey Stick of Human Prosperity. I encourage you to watch it. I'm not going to play it in this video because it's just not worth doing that, but it is a very interesting thing. It's put out by Marginal MRU, Marginal Revolution University. Um, so here we go. Inflation and deflation. And there's also disinflation that goes with this, which is what we're looking for right now. But inflation is a rise in the overall level of prices. That's inflation. A fall in the overall level of prices is deflation. That is not what you want. What you really want is what we call disinflation. So disinflation is a decrease in the inflation rate. So instead of looking for deflation, what you really want to ask for is disinflation, which is a decrease in the inflation rate. So if the inflation rate is 5% and the inflation rate falls to 3%, what you experience is disinflation. That's what you want. You want some inflation because that shows growth. You don't want deflation. Then you end up in a downward spiral, and that's bad for everyone. And it just causes big problems for the economy. So we do want some growth, and so that's a thing that we do look for. What you look for is somewhere between 1 and 3% growth. The target is 2.5. So looking for 2. We, as an economy, we look for 2.5. The government looks for 2. So there's some differences between what the private sector looks for and what the government looks for. It's just some things. Um, so that's it. So inflation is the second big of the big three. I don't know that I mentioned that at the beginning of this chapter. So there are three big things we look at. There's the big three in macroeconomics. There's unemployment, inflation, and GDP. So we talked a little bit about unemployment. This is inflation, and GDP would be next. Um, So could we just add up all the supplies and demands to find out what happens? Not really. Um, that just explains why it becomes more expensive relative to other goods and services. In the short run, it's closely related to the business cycle. And also in the short run, inflation and unemployment have a inverse relationship. So if more people have a job, that means more people have money. They get a paycheck, which means if you give people, and just think about this in a logical way. If you give people money, what are they going to do? They're going to go spend it. So as they spend money, it drives up prices. So there's this thing where if the unemployment rate falls, inflation rises in the short run. It disappears in the long run, yada, yada. But then also, if the unemployment rate rises and more people lose their jobs, what happens is the inflation rate falls. Not deflation, it is disinflation. So the inflation rate falls. Basically, people aren't buying as much stuff, so we have disinflation, and it's kind of good for us if you're a consumer. So prices fall, yeah, that kind of thing. So and that's kind of how it's tied to the business cycle. So when they say it's tied to the business cycle, it's typically tied to the whole unemployment piece of the business cycle. Um, that's where that goes. So level of prices mainly determined by changes in the money supply, and that's where like that hyperinflation piece comes in. If you just decide you're going to print money, you're going to cause problems. So inflation and deflation are problematic. Inflation discourages people from holding on to cash because cash loses its value as people are rising, as prices are going up. In extreme cases, people stop using cash altogether. And deflation can cause the reverse. Since cash gains value if the price level is falling, holding on to it's more attractive than investing in capital goods. Um, so what we want is some sort of price stability. We like the idea of the rationing function of prices, and so we want prices to change relatively slowly. You'd like to be able to walk into a store for a couple of weeks, the prices be the same. Over time, over a quarter or so, over a quarter, 3 months or so, you don't mind the prices going up a little bit, but that's fine. So that's a desirable goal. And over the last, you know, 40 years, 30 years or so, 35 years, that has been achieved. So we're good. So we are what they call an open economy. We trade goods and services with other countries without much government interference. Um, and people freak out about that. It's really weird. You see people all over the place. We get everything from China, yada, yada. China buys a ton of our soybeans. You've seen that's been in the news lately. Like China has bought zero soybeans from us here in 2025. And that was something that was um, in the millions and millions of dollars. And they are a little upset with us right now because of the tariffs. So they're buying zero soybeans. And so a lot of farmers are looking at having to go bankrupt because they can't sell their soybeans. That's a problem right now. So since the 90s, U.S. runs those trade deficits because we import more than we export. The trade deficit's the value of goods and services bought from the foreigners, and it's more than the value of goods and services sold to them. So if we ran a trade surplus, it just means the value of goods and services bought from foreigners is less value of goods and services sold to them. And there's countries that run surpluses. Um, so is the trade deficit a sign that something's wrong with the economy? Not necessarily. We are a major exporter in some goods. We are a major importer in some goods. Just happens to be that we import more than we export. So we are a major player on both sides. We just import more than we export. And they're going to kill us right now. Right now. In later we'll learn it. all this whole thing. So we'll get to it later. Countries with high investment spending relative to savings run deficit. Countries with low investment relative to savings run surpluses. So it's a thing. Um, Imports are in orange, exports are in blue. So the U.S. we import 3 point, where are we in? Billions. So that's $3.4 trillion. We export about 2.5 trillion. Germany imports about 1.7 trillion, exports about 2 trillion, and then China imports about 3 trillion and exports about 3.5 trillion. Honestly, I expected China's to be their surplus to be larger, but it's not. Lo and behold. This year, the value of a country's imports is equal to 1.2 billion. Value of its exports is equal to 1.3 billion. What are they running? Surplus or deficit? That is a surplus equal to 0.1 billion. And that is it for this chapter. So we will see you in chapter 7. Y'all have a good one.